Okay, so this is the second part of our video about 18th century novel. We dealt with the origins of the novel as a literary genre, and in particular, we saw how Daniel Defoe, after working as a journalist till he was 61 years old, he decided to apply his skills as a journalist, as a writer, to describe fictitious things. He had been describing real facts, but then he decided to describe the product of his imagination. Robinson Crusoe never existed, nor did Moll Flanders. And after the lesson of Defoe's novels, which can be defined as objective, matter-of-fact, realistic novels, in fact, you find details that create, I would like to add something, which create an effect of suspension of disbelief. That is, you stop suspension, so you suspend, you stop disbelief, that is, not believing. You stop not believing, so you start believing that what you're reading is actually the truth. And why is it so? Because Defoe gives the reader so many details about, take the shipwreck. He describes in the slightest details what Robinson finds on the relic. He says, Robinson writes in his diary, because don't forget, and this is another part of this idea of suspending our disbelief, that we are not reading a novel. We are supposed to be reading Robinson's diary. It is as if we were reading a diary. So in the diary, Robinson says, I found a hammer, I found some nails, I found a Bible, I found some paper, so he could read, he could take this diary during his years, because he stayed on that island for 28 years. So this is another tool for making us believe that the story is true. It has really happened. The same as regards Pamela. Pamela is supposed to be a collection of letters between a girl, Pamela Andrews, and her father. So once again, the writer, the author, pretends he is just collecting real material coming from the outside, but of course it's just fiction. Then we dealt with Pamela, Pamela or the Virtue Rewarded, Samuel Richardson's masterpiece. And then we saw how Henry Fielding created a mockery of Pamela, entitled Shamela, that is some kind of shameful Pamela, so Shamela, which is a mockery. Henry Fielding is the father of the anti-heroic novel. So what used to be heroes and heroines, Robinson Crusoe, Moll Flanders, Pamela Andrews, are now described in a reversed way. So it's an anti-heroic novel. In the case of Pamela, and the subtitle is The Virtue Rewarded, and this is probably the reason why Fielding made a mockery of this novel, because he's just wondering, is she a truly virtuous girl, or is she just using a strategy to marry Mr. B and and to become a rich lady, which actually happens. And you have to remember that it is all related to the idea of predestination, the fact that each one of us who has been chosen by God will find out if he or she is one of the chosen people, if he becomes a successful person. If you become successful, basically, if you become rich, it is very likely for you to be one of the chosen people. So you will be saved in the afterlife. You will go to heaven without even deserving it, because according to the Protestant ethics, we cannot deserve anything, basically because we don't have free will. Our will is bound to evil. Our will is bound to Satan. So how can we deserve anything if we only can make evil things? It's impossible. So there must be another way to go to heaven. That way is predestination. Okay. On the island, Robinson Crusoe starts wondering, why me? Why did the rest of the crew die? And I am the only one who survived the shipwreck. Why me? Who is protecting me? Why am I now on this island? Why have I found the relic of the ship which is going to help me survive on this island? I have found candles, I have found hammers, tools for me to survive. Why? What have I done to deserve this? The reason is maybe God has chosen me. So Robinson on the desert island starts. He also suffers from. We may say he has a temperature, and during this feverish episode, he has a nightmare, or maybe we should say, no, actually, it's a nightmare because he compares the fire of fever, he has a temperature, the fire of fever to the fire of hell. So he thinks, am I going through hell? No, no way. This is just a phase. I am going through hell, but because I am going through this bad adventure, this being alone on an island, but I survived. So maybe it's a way God is using to make me a stronger man, to make me deserve the fact that he has chosen me. So, okay, I'm gonna be saved. God has chosen me, but I need to be prepared for the reward. The reward, just like Pamela had a reward in the end of her story. She becomes rich. Even Robinson becomes rich because don't forget the plantation he bought on his first voyage. In the end, the plantation will make him a rich man. He will earn 600,000 pounds, which was a huge amount of money for that time. So he becomes not only rich, a very rich and wealthy man after 28 years on a desert island. You may think, but how are the two things related? There's one thing in common: God's will. Everything was a part of God's plan. God had planned this all. The first shipwreck, the second shipwreck, then he became a rich man. He went back home and he said to his father, see, I was right. You didn't want me to leave in the first place. You wanted me to stay because I was already born into a rich and wealthy family, and you asked me, what are you doing? Why are you leaving your house? You're already rich. Is it really necessary for you to leave this all and make your own fortune? And just to conclude with Daniel Defoe, but this is what middle class people wanted to hear. Robinson is the first middle class hero because the 18th century is witnessed the rise of the middle class as a new social class, the rise of journalism and the rise of the novel. Because why the novel? Why not theater? Because plays were populated by kings, queens, knights, nothing that had anything to do with middle class people. Middle class people didn't want to go to the theater because first they were illiterate, they were unlearned, they couldn't even understand maybe that difficult English that was used at theater. And second, they wanted to read something, especially to their kids, that celebrated these new middle class values. The first middle class value is uh, be the maker of your own destiny. Be the faber fortunae tue. Every man has to be faber fortunae sue. Every man has to be a self-made man. I have to make myself by myself. I am not your son. I am myself. I want to be the maker of my own destiny, because it's the only way to understand if I am a part of God's plan. It has a religious meaning. This all is related to religion. That's why I insist so much on Martin Luther, on Luther's idea of predestination. You will never find such a kind of novel in France, in Italy, in whatever, in Spain. In Spain, you have Don Quixote. It's another anti-heroic novel. In England, you find the rise of the middle class and this new literary genre that is novel, modern novel. Modern novel is tailored on middle class people. It was perfect for middle class people. Novel. No aristocrat would ever read a novel like that. And just like no middle class man would have gone to the theater to watch plays about aristocrats. They were two worlds apart. So middle class people who had become the leading party wanted to read novels. Okay, other kinds of novels. I told you, Daniel Defoe, objective, realistic, matter-of-fact novels. Samuel Richardson, psychological, because what you couldn't find in Defoe was a psychological analysis. Defoe doesn't care about what Robinson feels, about what Molflander feels. He was a journalist. A journalist would never investigate or tell you what, for example, Napoleon, Oliver Cromwell, Julius Caesar, who cares? In a history book, have you ever found anything about Julius Caesar's feelings when he was murdered? You will never find such an investigation, a psychological investigation. Samuel Richardson starts adding this psychological perspective. So not only do you find the description of facts, but you also find the feelings. There's a famous letter, one of the letters which Pamela and her father exchanged, where Pamela says, "Look, Dad, I'm sorry. This letter is torn, is wet because I'm weeping, I'm crying, and the teardrops have somehow torn the paper." This is another way of making us believe that it's all true, that this letter already exists. This idea of a torn sheet of paper because Pamela is crying, it seems like reality, but it's not. So suspension of disbelief. You believe in what you read, even though it's not true. But the fact, Aristotle and even Plato would say the effect that you can identify with one of the characters and you can free yourself from bad, excessive passions. This is what Plato and Aristotle used to say about theater, not about novel writing, but I'm just asking you to think about it and make some kind of comparison between this idea of a catharsis. You free yourself from bad passions by reading, actually by watching a play in a theater. That is what Aristotle wanted us to do. Go to a theater, watch actors and actresses play. You will definitely identify yourself in one of the characters. So follow that character. Maybe that character is living the same situation you are living right now. So take a look at the way he or she acts, behaves. Look at the consequences of his or her bad actions, and so avoid doing the same. Learn the lesson. You have to learn the lesson. You go to the theater to learn. There's something you have to learn. When you leave the theater, you feel lighter. You have gotten rid of those bad passions that might ruin your life. Why ruin your life? Committing a crime, killing someone, using violence. If you see the consequences of what is going on, okay, sorry. If you see the consequences, low battery. If you see the consequences of what is going on stage, or we may say in the novel, you can learn. It's like living another person's life. You are living more than one life, more than just your life. When you read a novel, you're living a second life, a third life, and so on. That's the that's why it is so important to read novels, to read books, and especially to read literature, because it's other people's lives. You live more than once. if you read, if you follow the life of another person, it, who cares if this person has really existed or not? It's another life. You can follow the life of another person, and you can find the intersection between you can find yourself in a similar phase to what the character is going through, and you can see what is going to happen to you too, so you can learn about yourself. I like to say that I am not reading a book. The book is reading me, if you know what I mean. I'm not listening to a song. The song is telling me something about myself. That's why literature, poetry is so important. The book is reading me. I'm not reading the book. It works both ways. So, then we starting saying something about the first Irish national hero, that is Jonathan Swift. Jonathan Swift was born in Ireland, which at that time was completely under the English domination. You know that nowadays the island of Ireland is in part a free state, the Republic of Ireland, and in part, the northern part, Northern Ireland, is one of the four states which make the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The capital city is Belfast. On the other hand, the capital city of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, because Ireland is a republic, just like England and the rest of the kingdom is a kingdom, Ireland is a republic. I should say, maybe just because England follows the Anglican religion, Ireland follows the Catholic religion. It's just a way of marking the difference. This is us. We are the Irish people. You are the English people. It's a way of the same as happens in Barcelona, which would like to be independent alongside with Catalonia and so on. Jonathan Swift was the first Irishman to invite Irish people to rebel against the English domination. And he did so by writing a novel, a new kind of novel, that is Gulliver's Travels. It's a satirical novel. You may have heard about Gulliver's Travels, even in the form of comics, because especially the episode of Gulliver visiting the island of Lilliput, Gulliver and the Lilliputians, this Englishman, because Lemuel Gulliver, the protagonist of Gulliver's Travels, is an Englishman, and we're going to see why in a minute. He's an English doctor, some kind of scientist. He suffers from a first shipwreck, and he finds himself on an island which is inhabited by creatures that are 12 times smaller than he is, the Lilliputians. In this episode, on the first island, Gulliver brags about his being a giant. The idea is just like English people think of themselves as giants in a world of Lilliputians, in particular if they compare themselves to Irish people. This is what Jonathan Swift wanted to remark. But on the second island, he experiences being 12 times smaller. So on the first island, he is the giant. He brags about being a giant, but then he is in a way punished in the sense that he experiences how bad it feels if you are the mini creatures. In fact, he is put in a cage, treated as if he were a pet by the daughter of the king of the giants. And so the idea is now you will see how it feels when you are being treated like a pet, like a small creature. You had experienced feeling a giant. Now take a look and how it feels the other way round. So two opposite points of view. Gulliver the giant, Gulliver the small pet. On the third island, named Laputa, this has a lot to do with once again Martin Luther, because La Puta, you will understand in Spanish, means the prostitute. The idea is that Martin Luther said that reason is Satan's most seductive and beautiful prostitute. Satan uses our reason to stop, to prevent us from having faith, from believing. Because according to Martin Luther, the only thing that saves us is faith. So, reason was considered by Martin Luther as an enemy to our faith. If we use our reason, we do not have faith, because if we use our reason, we are not willing to accept as an act of faith, for example, God's existence. We prefer demonstrating, we prefer finding proof for what we call the truth. Reason does not accept truth as something that cannot be demonstrated. That is not reason, that is faith. So, Laputa is an island populated by people who use, not use, who abuse their reason. Gulliver is making the mockery of rationalists. And in this case, we have to keep in mind the opposition between empiricism and rationalism. English empiricism, John Locke, Berkeley, and French rationalism, René Descartes, for example. So, Francis Bacon against René Descartes. Italians call him Cartesio, but his name is Descartes. What is funny about the people who live on the island of Laputa? That they use their reason to investigate weird things, such as extracting the sunbeams from a cucumber. That is absurd. How could you even think that because a cucumber has grown, because the sun rays have made it grow, how can you even think of extracting the solar energy from some kind of vegetable? It's absurd, we might say. Another weird question, which should make us think back to Francis Bacon and his idola, they discuss how can misunderstanding be avoided. So every one of these academic people gives every one of them gives his solution. I would use shorter words. I would avoid using verbs. Another one says no. I would avoid nouns. Another one says if you just point at objects. So if you basically don't use words, if you don't use language anymore, misunderstanding will be avoided. But everything sounds crazy. And this is satire applied to the rationalism or empiricism debate. The debate was, is it better to follow empiricism or rationalism? On the fourth island, we find out the bitter truth about Jonathan Swift. He was a misanthrope. He hated human beings because he had been abandoned as a child by his mother. So, because he had been abandoned by his mother, he started hating the rest of mankind. Why am I telling you this? Because on the fourth island, inhabited by two kinds of creatures, the yahoos on one hand and the rational horses on the other. The rational horses are animals from Gulliver's point of view, but they have more reason than human beings. Human beings on this island act as if they were animals, driven by their instincts. Because don't forget that human beings do not have instincts. We have drives, not instincts. I will tell you about this difference next year, unfortunately. But these creatures, the yahoos, do have instincts like animals. Gulliver is ashamed of being of looking like the yahoos. He would much more prefer to be like the rational horses. This should make you think back of Montaigne when he said, when I'm cuddling my cat, am I playing with my cat or is my cat playing with me? So Montaigne was the first one who had doubts about who is the superior creature, a man or a cat. Am I right when I say that, oh, poor them, poor creatures, cats do not speak? Or am I the one who doesn't understand their language? Because on the other hand, they do understand mine. So maybe I am the inferior one, Montaigne used to say. And in a way, it's similar to what happens on this fourth island, on the island of the rational horses. They are such superior creatures that in their ununderstandable language, they do not even have the words to name human vices, jealousy, violence, envy. They do not even have the words in their language. So they truly are superior to human beings, to yahoos. And in fact, when he would like to stay on the island forever, but the rational horses say, look, it's not your home. You need to go back to England in this case. And when he is rescued, but he didn't want to be rescued. He wanted to stay there. He went back home, and on the very first dinner with his friends and family, he says, I don't want to stay here. I can smell yahoos everywhere. And so he left his house and went to live in a stable alongside with horses. He preferred horses to humans. And I told you the reason why he wrote this final episode, because he was a misanthrope, and this was because he had been abandoned by his mother as he was a kid. The last author is Lawrence Stern. He would need a video just to describe what he brought to literature. Literature books usually summarize it all by saying that Stern is the father of unconventional novel. That is, he somehow violated all kinds of writing rules. Traditional novel was based on the logical and chronological order. Stern did not follow any logical or chronological order. If you take the life and adventures of Tristram Shandy, gentlemen, you will find out that the story opens in medias res. We start with an already grown-up Tristram, but then 10 chapters later, you find Tristram as a boy. And then again, you find Tristram telling someone about the moment when his parents had basically sex and he was conceived, we should say, his conception. And it's a sad part of the story. Tristram, whose name sounds like Tristis in Latin, he says, when they made me, they forgot the most important ingredient, that is love. We find this particular on the moment when he says that my father and my mother had sex once a month on the same day when my father used to wind the clock. So he was even interrupted by my mother at the very moment, the very crucial moment in a sexual, during sex, basically. This may sound funny. These two people having sex, and she asked him, have you remembered to wind the clock? And he went like, how could you interrupt me in such a critical moment? How can you ask me about the clock while we are having sex? This may sound funny, but actually you will think about it when you will study Luigi Pirandello and the idea of sentimento and avvertimento del contrario. Pirandello said that an episode like this may sound funny when you first read it, when you first hear it, but then if you think about it twice, it turns to something sad, to something bitter. There's nothing to laugh at. If you hear someone saying, my father and my mother had not planned my birth. They did not plan to have me. They did not think of having a kid. I am the son of, we may say, an almost automatic sexual act of sex, nothing truly desired. So this is why Tristram's life started as a bitter life, as a miserable life. And think of his father, Walter Shandy. He had thought of giving him the name Hermes Trismegistus. I think, like any father, I would do it the same. He was thinking of his son as a person who would later become a great man. So, a great name for a future great man. But somebody misspelled his name from Trismegistus into Tristram. This is a way of making a mockery of predestination as well, because Walter Shandy truly believed in predestination, but the very beginning of his life was nothing like something which had been predestined by God. You think of your son as a future Trismegistus, means 3 times great. He's gonna be sad, a miserable person, a sad person. And the final piece of information I'm gonna give you is Stern's style. I told you that he did not follow any logical or chronological order, but he did not even follow the rule of some kind of omniscient narrator. There is no omniscient narrator. There is no external or internal voice that comments on what characters do. All episodes are narrated from the point of view of each character. So, n points of view plus the point of view of the narrator plus the point of view of the author. So we had the same episode seen described from a lot of viewpoints. This is why the life of Tristram Shandy will be dilated into 9 volumes. This novel is 9 volumes long, and it was written across 10 years. It took 10 years to write this novel, 9 volumes. It's a lot, because if you describe each episode from the point of view of each character, see how dilated it will be.